On this episode of ResiWeek, I talk with Joe Whitaker exclusively about CEDIA selling their show to Emerald Expositions, as well as where CEDIA has been and where they're going in the future. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
ResiWeek episode 53, going forward. This week's episode of ResiWeek is brought to you by Daylight.
This is ResiWeek.
Welcome to ResiWeek. This is your weekly wrap-up of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. And today, I'm joined by my good pal, my good buddy, Joe Whitaker from Our Thoughtful Home. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. Thank you for having me again. Unfortunately, neither of us are at ISE, so we get to hang out here.
I know. I have children that are very young, so I was not allowed to go. That's what that means. But no, neither of us are at ISE. Tim is at ISE with a slew of AVNation people, and they are going to be covering the entire show for us, including, again, all the verticals we cover specifically for your interest. They'll be covering a bunch of the residential stuff that is showing up at ISE. Now, Joe, I do have a question for you because, the main story that I want to jump into with you today is mainly the sale of the CEDIA Expo. But before we jump into that, have you been to ISE before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing that I honestly really love about ISE is the way in which they bring kind of all the mainstream technology that we use together into one big massive show. It's not CES, it's not Infocom, it's not NAB, it's not CEDIA. It's ISE, and obviously it's a collaboration between Infocom and CEDIA, but they've also got all the digital signage stuff and everything else. What is it about ISE that makes it so different than all the other shows that we have going? Because it's not just a mishmash of all these shows combined. It is its own animal.
The biggest thing is you can eat 5 weeks of food there and still lose 20 pounds because there's so much walking. No, it is interesting in that it is a very peculiar mismatch. For one, it's in a location where typically globally, no matter where you're at, you can get to. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty even jump. The other thing is that partnership between Infocom and CEDIA. A lot of people don't realize that it's a true business partnership. And, ISE has its own board of directors. And on that board of directors sits people from CEDIA, executive staff, and from ISE. So they kind of bring all these ideas together. And both associations have great ideas and other great brands that they're friends with that could be on their show floor, but it matches somebody else. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't fit in there. So that's why you see some other things that you typically wouldn't see at an Infocom alone or at a CEDIA show alone. And the other thing is because of its location, you get a lot of cool brands that typically don't happen over here. Mm-hmm. Like I'm going to give Tom Butler over there in the UK kind of a shout out because you'll see art acoustic stuff at ISE, something you typically won't see. And it's the only current global show.
Yeah.
Where you'll see Australian brands, you'll see everything. And those are things that when we from the US go over there, we say, oh, this is a neat video switch, which there was one I saw some years back that wasn't sold in the US. So we get back. Now we're dealing with a whole new vendor, a whole new distributor, and a whole new model that wasn't available to us before. That's kind of one of the powerful things about ISE. It's that one chance to get global exposure. There's things you're going to see and learn that you'd never learn if you didn't leave the border in the US. And the same thing in UK or Australia or anywhere else. You go there, you're going to be exposed to business models, technology, and things you just don't see.
Well, and I think that was the I've only been once. I was there last year, and as I mentioned, I'm not able to go this year, but next year I'm planning to be there again. That was probably the biggest thing that I noticed is not only does it bring all these, kind of verticals together, but it is the globalization part. It's the fact that it is easily, 10 hours, give or take, from just about any place in the world.
Yeah.
Just about. So it's not an insane flight for anyone, unless you're Australia. They're far. Yeah, they're a flight, but notwithstanding. So you have all these different people, all these different brands that don't always show their faces across the border here, but it's also the way in which, and again, given the current world situation, this is going to sound a little comical, but it is that globalization that sometimes North America misses and forgets. We get very focused on our local stuff, whereas when you go overseas, you see a much larger appreciation for that. And you find, just as you said, so many different brands that you might not ever see here, but that might either fit your business model or might open a door to a new business model that you're just not going to obtain here.
Absolutely. I mean, the thought of ISC, that whole process was a big part of the eye opener for CEDIA itself going global.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big thing as we realized, and it's funny, I brought this up a lot of times when people ask me, why did CEDIA go global? What is the benefit of CEDIA going global? And I always look at them and I say, our industry in technology, residential technology specifically, is a whole different trade than any other trade in the world, because we're not regulated by, most of the time,
mm-hmm.
regulations, governmental regulations, electricians unions, plumbers unions. We don't have those constraints. We're reactive to the technology as technology grows.
Yes.
And that grows globally. That doesn't grow, regionally. Google is Google everywhere in the world. That's a big piece of technology. Amazon, everywhere in the world. And those are the things we react to and we grow our industry with. So CEDIA being a global entity it's perfect. It makes sense for what we can do. And that's kind of that beauty of ISC, though,
mm-hmm.
is that was kind of that exposure for CEDIA to see this works globally because it's technology. A cell phone is a cell phone no matter where you are in the world. Certain regions are growing faster than others. And one of the kind of the cool things about ISC is you've already got content distribution in China that's 8K.
Mm-hmm.
They're already distributing content in 8K. We're not going to see distributed content here in the U.S. And not us as home technology professionals, not us as consumers, but you go to ISC and you get exposure to see what that looks like, what that is, what is going to be here in 5 years. The sad thing of in 5 years, we're probably going to see brass fixtures and locks again. It's going to be popular.
Mm-hmm.
It's popular in UK right now. I hate brass, but just like square light plates for our light switches,
mm-hmm.
which has been hot in UK for years, and just
they're finally coming our way. Well, and
so
that's
what's important for ISC for technology.
And that's the big thing is if you haven't been to, whether you're a residential pro or a commercial pro or whatever, if you haven't been to an Infocom or a CEDIA in a couple of years, when you do go back, you kind of, your eyes are open to how much the industry's grown and how much is available to you. And then when you make that next jump and say, hey, I'm going to go to ISC, because that's something that people ask me once I came back from my first trip. They were asking me all the time about why I was so, infatuated with the ISC model. And it was exactly what you just said. It's the fact that when you go to CEDIA and you go to Infocom and all the local North American shows, you see what's coming in a couple of years. When you go to ISC, you see what's, probably 5 years ahead for us here. And it's, I got a friend who's he lives in Germany, and he always comes across, and we always joke, we're both kind of clothes guys. So he'll start telling me what's in fashion in Europe right now. And I'll look at that, take that information and go, okay, so that's going to be fashionable here in about 4 years. So I can't buy it today, but in about 2 years, I'm going to start watching for it because then I can pick it up and be on the upside of it before it's, trendy. And, tech is honestly very similar to that. But speaking of CEDIA and some of the moves that they've made in the past year, they've gone global and they've sold their show. So last week we had Vin, Bruno, as well as Haggai and a couple other people commenting on the CEDIA show, but everybody was coming at it from, obviously Vin was coming at it from CEDIA's standpoint, being the CEO. Haggai was coming at it from the CEO of Access Networks, so from a manufacturer standpoint. But outside of myself, we really didn't have anybody who was able to comment on the sale from an integrator standpoint. And you're in a special position, Joe, because obviously you're on the board. You're fairly well involved in the industry, if I can make that assumption. But you're also an integrator. Right. So you're like me. Or I'm like you, depending how we look at it. Given the news that CEDIA has been making over the last year, what has prompted all of this kind of from, and obviously I don't want you to take us inside the boardrooms and the boardroom meetings, but what has prompted CEDIA to be making some of these changes as somebody who is obviously familiar, but as somebody who's a member and looking at it from a member standpoint?
Well, just look at it from the last 4 to 5 years, I'll give it that. CEDIA changed its look, kind of did a rebranding, a refocusing. Then obviously going global. Then after that, the sell of the show. So up until 5 years ago, CEDIA hadn't made any big changes, right? Really at all. There were really significant that had to do with the times. The way the industry has changed, the way the momentum has changed. And a lot of that change happened on the outside of our industry. And we just kind of, CEDIA wasn't recognized. And so it's all these changes came about because a really interesting mixed group of people came together as a board and acted on some decisions and some ideas that had actually been, discussed and pitched years and years ago. When Ken Erdman was the chairman of CEDIA, this was probably 7 years ago, he brought up this globalization idea. But just like the rebranding, it just wasn't time yet. The industry wasn't ready for it. Our world wasn't ready for it. All of these changes are CEDIA growing into what it actually is. It's not just a trade show. It's not just an education body. It's not just a government task force to help the integrator with, laws and legalities and all the other things that come along with it. It's kind of all those things. And as a coming of age, it's time to, grow up a little bit. We're not running around the playground with tennis shoes anymore. It's time to really buckle down.
Well, and it's interesting you bring it up because CEDIA for a long time kind of has had that. It's something different to everyone. To some people, it is just a trade show, or it was just a trade show. To some people, it was just that lobbying body that went after Congress and went after local state bodies for bylaws and enforcement. For some, it was just a membership community. By going global and then honestly by selling arguably kind of their most noted property in the sale of the show, what does that mean for not only the integrators who are members and prospective members, but what does that mean for the industry in general? Where does CEDIA go from this? Do they?
Well, that's a good question. It's one that behind closed doors has been discussed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But you looked at CEDIA in the past. CEDIA was always about 4 things: trade show, business, education, and community. 4 things. That's what it, the main portions of it always have been. Well, trade show was a trade show. It's a good place to bring the community together, bring some education to the table on a national basis, and some other things. But the trade show actually didn't do anything as itself for me as a home technology professional. It was a place where, yes, I could meet manufacturers, but I could do that at regional shows. I could do that at distributors. I could do that elsewhere. Timing was always good because it was when the new gadgets came out.
Right.
But for it really, in my opinion, a lot of times trade show took away from CEDIA as an association to actually be able to get more involved with the members and offer more to the members. When you had, 75% of CEDIA staff spending 75% of all their time on the preparation for the next year's trade show,
Mm-hmm.
instead of creating, new outreach programs, new education, new regional things.
And not to interrupt you, but as somebody who, I guess, never just paid attention to that number, when Vin brought that up, and of course when the sale went public and everybody knew about it and everybody was writing about it, that was the thing that shocked me, was how much time CEDIA's staff dedicated to that show. And I look at my business and heck, some of the businesses that we work for, and go, if you dedicated 75% of your workforce, not only in like man hours, but also in people, to one event, one 3-day event, how do you succeed at anything else you're doing?
Exactly. And then, on the other side of what you just said, you could not have said that any better. On the other side of that is, what is the members' benefit to those 3 days?
Well,
I've always said a couple of things. It used to be management conference. Now it's business exchange. Things like that, taking training back on the road like it used to be a long time ago, doing those things where there is a very visible and impactful thing that CEDIA does for the other 362 days a year.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just those 3 days. It's not just trade show for those 3 days. There's a whole 362 other days that CEDIA needs to specifically impact all of its members. And one of the other things I do want to say, I really want to make sure I classify members. Members are, each one of us is home technology professionals, but members are also manufacturers,
Mm-hmm.
and members are also trade association, distributors, CE Pro. They're a member. So making all this stuff work better for every member outside of trade show, the best way to do that is not concentrate all our focus on trade show.
Right.
Let's take ourselves out of that. Still have our hands in it, but take ourselves out of that. And now let's take all of that and focus on making business exchange bigger and better, doing on-the-road trainings, bringing certification to regional places in the US and UK and Australia and South Africa, and now being able to really push it because we don't have to worry about trade show anymore.
Well, and I've always been a big proponent, and if you ever Google me and look at things I've written, one of the biggest things that no, don't do it. No, you might find other stuff. We don't want to talk about it. We're keeping our PG rating, Joe. Come on, work with me. But when you do, now he's Googling. When you do, look at some of the stuff that I've written about, a lot pertains to why trade shows are so important. Because even myself, I got to the for integrators. Let me stress that. But even myself, I went through a phase where I was going to trade shows all the time, and then I took a couple years off and I stopped going. And then when I finally got back, I kind of, took a step back and realized what I missed by not attending these shows. And there is something to be said for the things you can learn and the things you can pick up at the shows. But for an organization like CEDIA to have that be their primary focus as a member was not doing enough for me.
Yeah. Well, one of the good things about this whole everything that has happened with the Emerald acquiring the show is that CEDIA was able to keep all the important things. And when I say keep all the important things, I mean all the education seats. Actually, I think education seats, I'm going to throw an estimate out there. I think I'm pretty close. Education seats went from us originally having and owning 6,000 available seats for education. With the deal with Emerald, we will now have 9,000, I think. So we actually gained 3,000 seats or so just in availability for education, which is going to there's going to be more than one rack building class, which was an amazingly well-attended class. CEDIA is going to be able to keep all the branding, the branding, the look, the messaging. It is still going to be CEDIA. The education is going to get better. There's going to be more of it. CEDIA outreach, which will actually, I'm guessing, you're going to have to hold on. I'm guessing here that with certain staff members not having to worry about the mechanics of the show now, that I'm thinking the association's outreach and interactions during the show are going to improve, because you're not going to have some of these staff members, running around worried about the day-to-day. They're going to be running up to manufacturers or HTPs asking them, well, how was your day? I think there's going to be some things that are going to be amazing that nobody's even thinking about yet, because everybody's just like, the show's sold. I really think it's going to see a big change. And the other thing that I keep kind of falling back on is that CEDIA is going to have more time to do all of the other things now.
And all those other things are the things that members, whether they be integrators, whether they be manufacturers, distributors, whatever, that will provide more value to them. And I think one of the things that kind of gets lost in this conversation is that, yeah, they sold the show, but that's really not the biggest part of it. To me, the biggest part is that, yes, you sold the show. Yes, we're now dedicating more, CEDIA staff member time to benefiting members. But you're also, you didn't just, if you had just sold the show to somebody that runs shows, right? Like the guy that runs our local home shows here, he could have bought the show. He probably didn't have the pockets, but he could have bought the show. And that would have done nothing for us. But the fact that Emerald bought the show, who has a slew of other shows that they run, including some big ones like the National Bath and Kitchen Show, or National Kitchen and Bath Show. That's a huge deal, because as we've embarked in the last year or two on IoT and all this other technology that is peripheral to what we do, it's not amps, speakers, and TVs anymore. Having Emerald running the show and being the company that is going after exhibitors. This year we had Amazon there. We've had some other, consumer companies coming in, but not at the rate that honestly I would have expected, given what IoT is doing in the consumer space. The fact that Emerald is now there and is able to say, hey, we're going to talk to guys from Whirlpool. We're going to talk to Samsung, LG, to all the guys that go to, like, all the technology companies that go to CES are now going to have a much easier conversation, because Emerald is the size that it is and may work with many of these manufacturers and many of these verticals in their other shows. Bringing that to bear opens a world of possibilities for the CEDIA show. And no longer will somebody walk in and go to an IoT pavilion, if you will, and see a couple of light switches from companies that we haven't heard of before. They may have the opportunity to go to that pavilion and see a smart washing machine from Samsung or LG or Whirlpool, to see all the stuff that our consumers see when they walk into Lowe's and get excited about. We now might have an opportunity to get firsthand knowledge of. And to me, that's kind of arguably the biggest part of this.
Well,
am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Tell me how I'm right, Joe.
It's even a little bigger than that, because you look at when it was still Expo was still attached to it. You look at CEDIA Expo 2014, 14. And you had Nest first time on the trade show floor, right?
Yep.
Then you look at last year, 2016. You had Nest. Sonos has been there for a while. Then you had Google. They had their own booth. Amazon had their own booth. You had these people started to recognize and actually became members. They are a member.
Yeah.
You have that recognition, but you're right. There's all these other ones that are out there. Appliance industry is a perfect one. I've been chatting up getting appliances on the trade show floor for years, because I saw when I did some consultation some years ago on some Whirlpool stuff, and they came out with 6 Sense, which was their IoT platform that they had. And I talked to Ron Fleming and some other guys at CEDIA. I was like, we've got to have this, and he's like, yeah, we do. They're not ready though, which was true. But you look at what you just said about Emerald, right? And so I brought up something just to kind of reinforce what you just said, which is really interesting actually, because on the other areas of construction or anything like that we could have our hands in, or that we have technologies, or that these technologies intertwine, you look at all the other things that they own, and it gets kind of crazy. HD, which is a hospitality expo, hospitality summit, kitchen KBIS, which you already mentioned, HCD, EFA, 30 construction super conference, design and retail, the big kitchen and bath, healthcare design, EFA, which is Environments for Aging in Place magazine, and they have their own show. These are all things that we have technologies to be involved in, but they have technologies that we need to see and be educated on. Well, this is where the magic happens.
And not only that, by having the opportunity for us to see what they're already offering in those realms and in those verticals, it allows us as integrators and as members to say, okay, because let's be honest, we are the kings at making things work together. That's what we do. We bring everything else to the table and say, okay, that's cool. Let's make this work over here and bring this in and bring that from up there down to make everything work together. But everybody else doesn't ever normally realize that. So by having the opportunity to see some of these other things, and Emerald specifically, to be able to, and maybe we're putting too much hope on Emerald bringing things together, but for their bottom line, it makes sense. So having the opportunity to have them help us bring this all together, and because they're working with us and we're working with them, the opportunity to see some of the stuff that they have that we would never consider being in, like an aging in place forum.
They've tested this, and that's the unique thing. The idea has been tested, and it's one of the things that every time I hear somebody talk about, CEDIA is selling the show, and somebody's trying to explain it or talk about, that they don't talk about, they don't express is, it's already been tested, and here's how. So, all these conversations with Emerald have been going on for a while. Now, previous to the actual transaction, CEDIA had a 10,000 square foot technology pavilion at Kitchen and Bath Show. So now Emerald owns that show. So now, okay, here's all your stuff. It's on one of our big floors. We're seeing how all this stuff works together, because we realize if you're aging in place, what place are you usually aging in? Your home, or a somewhat smaller version of your home inside a really big building. These are all things that this industry is catered for. And we have all these other pieces that can tie right into it. But guess what? We haven't had the exposure. We haven't been able to bring this stuff together. What a better way than just, let's tidy up this trade show. Let's get that on. And then now your members are going to be exposed to all of these other things. And oh, by the way, you've got 3,000 more seats of education. Please make them education spots on aging in place, on kitchen and bath technologies. Wow. Now we actually created a member benefit out of a tech show sale.
Yeah. And I think, down the road, when we're looking back, after next year's show, there will be very few people who will be even commenting on the sale the way it has been happening the last little bit. Once this all kicks off, and unless it is a complete meltdown, which I don't they're big enough that won't happen. And there will be changes, and there will be things that some, members may be upset with. But all in all, looking back after a year or two after this sale, I don't foresee anyone looking at it with a critical mind and being able to say that this wasn't a good idea.
Right. And I had a couple of things written down on a note over here. Was the other thing that kind of is not really being addressed, when I say that CEDIA will be able to do more during the year, is that this kind of, I don't want to say overshadowed, but this was so big and so visible that people forgot that this CEDIA becoming global thing just got accomplished just prior to that. So what that means is now there's time and effort to be able to take something like business exchange and repeat that in EMEA, in the UK, and take tech forums that happens over in the UK and bring that over to the US. And then take the way they do an awards ceremony as this, really neat gala that's just, really means something. Bring that over here. Now we have a mechanism to be able to bring all these things together and actually make it better, make it bigger. And that's what everybody's forgetting is there's a lot more to do now, and there's a lot more people involved. So there's nowhere to go but up. Even if the trade show fails, we're gonna play devil's advocate here. Even if the trade show fails, it's not going to affect the members.
No, not at all.
It's not going to affect the members at all.
Well, and I think that is arguably the best point out of everything that we talked about today is now the trade show doesn't matter. If members show up, great. If they don't, who cares? If numbers are down and not as many integrators show up, the house isn't burning. Who cares? Right. Because we're still going to continue to do the education. We're still going to continue to bring all this new information on a global scale to everyone else involved, because we're not, everyone was so focused on the, again, how many man hours were involved in this and how much time people were taking. Now, on the flip side, none of it matters, because whether or not the show is a success and whether it grows or not will not have as much of an effect on the trade industry, the actual CEDIA industry, but also on its members.
And that of course was a worst case scenario.
Completely.
And to quote a former MIA board member, Sawan, it's a win-win situation. Seriously, think about it, right? So Emerald obviously has more money than CEDIA.
Yeah.
More money, right? So they can secure bigger spaces much easier at much better rates and attract more manufacturers, make the show bigger. And if you look at from, 2013 to present, there's been a steady attendee growth year over year for CEDIA. Now, what happens when you make it, bigger
and better,
more stuff? There's no way that it can shrink. I mean, it's
There's
just
something about that. If you build
moves.
it, people come and
Yeah,
stuff.
that whole thing. You know,
That whole thing.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those that it's not set up for failure in any manner.
No.
You know, the way it is mechanically. You know, there's going to be more education, more CEDIA involvement that's actually involvement with the members and not the show, a bigger show with a bigger budget, and a bigger audience of manufacturers actually show up on the floor. I mean, it's a big deal. But then again, you know, you have to look at common press today. All they want to ask is, you know, how much was it? What does it affect? What are you losing? You know, and all of these things, one of the most important things is, how big is this going to be? How big of a gain is this going to be?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the biggest thing we've ever seen.
I would have to agree. There's nothing that points to an actual negative factor of this.
Zero.
So on that note, let's cut this one short. Otherwise, we're going to just keep going and going because it's you and me,
we
bud.
always do. But
I know.
I do want to drop something real quick.
Yeah, drop something.
I don't know if you're going. March 1st through 3rd, Business Exchange. I'll be there, so that means you have to be there. No, it's going to be a good one this year. It's going to be in San Antonio, Texas, my hometown. So that means I'm going to tell everybody where, you know, good barbecue and tacos is.
Tacos.
And it's going to be a good time. Perfect weather, March in San Antonio. You couldn't ask for better. And I want to see the place packed, full house.
I must say, I've talked to quite a few people, both manufacturers and integrators, who have gone to previous tech exchanges and have heard nothing but good things.
Well, you know, it's Heather, who is on your show a little bit. She loves it.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a, you know, big supporter of it. And if somebody like that could be a big supporter, what could be, you know, what
could be wrong? What could you be missing?
Before we leave, do you want to drop a soft announcement on something that's coming in the future?
Oh, we could.
You know, you might as well.
Well,
I mean,
so hopefully you've enjoyed listening to us banter for the last, 45 minutes. George is going to hate editing this one. But Joe and I like to banter a lot. So we might be working on a little something that includes more Matt and Joe or Joe and Matt banter, specific to residential, but maybe not from the angle you're thinking. So stay tuned. It's coming soon. And you should like it. Because seriously, what's not to like? It's me and Joe.
I know. I mean, it couldn't be anything better.
No, not at all. All right. That sums up this episode of ResiWeek. Thanks again for joining us. Joe, where can people connect with you?
You can find me on Twitter at Thoughtful Home, Facebook at The Thoughtful Home, and you can always drop me an email at joe@thethoughtfulhome.com.
Very good. For myself, you can find me on Twitter at Matt D. Scott and pretty much every other social platform. Under that, just Google me. I'm fairly easy to find, unless there's a rugby guy in Australia, Matt Scott. He's messing with my search algorithms. But notwithstanding, please, in addition to following and connecting with us, please make time to stop by AVNation.tv. You'll find this show and all the past episodes, as well as a wide variety of other shows that cover all the verticals that we cover. When you're there on AVNation.tv, please make time to check out all of our underwriters. They allow us to do what we do, and we are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you support them as well. Stay tuned. We've got tons of content coming to you from ISC 2017, and that will be making its way to the interwebs as of tomorrow, because it's kicking off tomorrow. That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of ResiWeek.